Welcome to the Banning Museum, the home of Phineas Banning. The room that you're in right now is the front parlor. It's the most formal room of the house. If you were actually visiting when the Banning family lived here, children would probably be sent outside to play with the Banning children, and teachers and parents would come into this room to visit with the family. As you look around this room, it's just filled with beautiful items, furniture, statues, paintings. All of these items in this room were meant to impress, to show people that the family had good taste and that they could afford such things. On the far wall over here, you will see portraits of Phineas Banning and Mrs. Banning when they were younger. And over here you see a wonderful grand piano. In those days, people provided their own entertainment. Oftentimes they would have parties here. In fact, they were famous for their parties, regales as they were called. And often someone would be playing the piano and there would be dancing in the hallway. Now, I said that usually children were not invited in this room. It was mostly for company and guests, but there certainly were exceptions. When the family had company, oftentimes children were brought into the room to meet the guests. And when they came in, children would curtsy or they would bow. And oftentimes they would do something entertaining for the company, such as recite a poem that they had memorized, or maybe read a verse, play a musical instrument, maybe even tell a riddle. If you were invited into the parlor, what would you do? The room that I'm in right now is Phineas Banning's office. Phineas Banning was in the business of transportation. The name of his company was Banning and Company. Banning and Company started out running freight wagons and stagecoaches from here at the Banning Ranch down to the harbor to pick up passengers that came in on the ships. The stagecoaches would pick up the passengers, the freight wagons would pick up the cargo, and they would head into the Pueblo, into Los Angeles, and then back again. So this was a very, very busy place. After the Civil War, Phineas Banning was elected to the state senate. His main goal as a state senator was to bring the first railroad to Southern California. And that became a reality in 1869. The Los Angeles and San Pedro Railroad began business. The San Pedro and Los Angeles Railroad ran between Wilmington and downtown Los Angeles. Also, as a state senator, Phineas Banning signed the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery. And you can see his signature here, right at the tip of my fan. Right under Senator, there he is, Phineas Banning. Do you know what I mean when I say the word abolish? Now let's look around Phineas Banning's office. Over here, let's look at his desk. How would you compare this to an office in today's world? Let's see what he has here. A canteen with some water, an inkwell, and fountain pens over here. Oh, some eyeglasses, a stamp pad, and some miscellaneous papers here. All of those are things that would have been used in offices in those days. But thinking about today's offices, what inventions are missing? This is safe in his office. There were no banks in Los Angeles until the late 1860s. So this was something that was very necessary for businesses of that time. This is where they would keep their valuables and very important papers. I don't know if you noticed this when you first saw into the room. This is Phineas Banning's copy press. Now, most of the documents in those days were handwritten, and when he needed a copy to give to someone on maybe a contract that they had signed, this is what he would use, the copy press. So in order to use the copy press, You would take the original handwritten paper of the contract, you'd put it in a blank piece of paper, put a solution in here, and turn the press to make a copy. Now the first copy that came out would be a mirror image. So immediately you would take out the original copy, put in the mirror image copy, another blank piece of paper, and you had to do this quickly before the solution would dry, turn the press, and out came the copy that you needed. So a lot of work just for one copy. So the room that we're in right now is called the family living room. Sometimes it's called the back parlor. It's very different from the front parlor. The back parlor, or this family living room, this is where the family gathered. And you have to think about it back in those times. This was before electricity. There was no electricity in this home. Throughout the home, you've probably noticed that there's candles. There were oil burning lamps. The lighting fixtures were gas lighting fixtures. So when the family gathered in the evening, they didn't have iPads, they didn't have their laptops, they didn't have iPhones or video games, nothing like that. What they did are some of the things that you see here. The family often read together. They would take turns reading. You can see all of these books here. They played parlor games. Children were encouraged to learn to play musical instruments, and they would practice in here. There's a stereoscope over there that they played with. You can see over here there is collections. Collecting was also very popular. Over here we can see on display a butterfly collection. I notice over here there's an ostrich egg. The ostrich farm was a very popular destination back in those days. Here's another collection over here of seashells. And did you happen to notice this chair? Quite unusual looking, but remember, Los Angeles once was referred to as a cow town. This was really the Wild West. And this chair is made of cowhide and cow horns. I wonder how many cow horns are on this chair. This is the master bedchamber. This is the parents' bedroom. When Phineas Banning was 24 years old, he married Rebecca Sanford. She was 19. They were married for 14 years, and during those 14 years, they had 9 children. Now, there's a sad part of that story as well. Of those 9 children, only 3 survived. 3 boys named William, Joseph, and Hancock. Now, this was a long time ago. In those days, they did not have the medicines that we now have. They had epidemics like the smallpox epidemics. They didn't have immunizations. They didn't know as much about germs in those days. In those days, children were born right at home in their parents' bed. It was thought to be safer than to go to a hospital. And also there would have been no hospital or doctor nearby. If there was an illness or an accident, the doctor would come out to the home, but there might be considerable travel involved. Now, the first Mrs. Banning, Rebecca, also died shortly after the birth of their 9th child. 2 years later, Phineas Banning remarried. He married Mary Hollister from Hollister, California, and they had 3 children. And of those 3 children, 2 survived, this time girls, 2 girls. Their names were Mary and Lucy. Okay, we've kind of talked about when the Bannings were living here. There was, of course, no electricity. The only heat source would have been fireplaces, and you probably noticed fireplaces in all of the rooms. And there was no indoor plumbing. What that means is no running water in the house, so that you could not go to the sink and turn on the faucets and wash your hands or wash your face. All of the bedrooms would have pitchers and basins like this. This one's very fancy, made of silver. Every day someone would have to go out and pump water outside. The pitchers would be filled with water and be carried up the steps and brought into the bedrooms. And when you needed to wash, you would pour the water into the basin. That is where you would wash your hands, wash your face, and brush your teeth. Down on the floor here is a foot bath. You could stand in the foot bath to wash and also, of course, wash your feet in the foot bath. Speaking of washing up, typically people only took baths once a week because it was a lot of work. It would have been a metal tub, it would have been downstairs because there would have been a lot of water that would have to be pumped outside. The bathtub would have to be filled with the water, it would have to be heated first on the stove, so only once a week for a bath. So no indoor plumbing also means no flush toilet in the house. In the daytime, people would go outside to an outhouse that was just a small wooden shack away from the house a bit that had a hole in the ground, and that's where they would go to the bathroom in the daytime. At nighttime, all of the bedrooms have chamber pots, and they're usually hidden. This one is quite fancy. This chamber pot in this room is hidden in the steps that go up to the bed. I'll show you. There would be a porcelain pot in here, and that's where you would go to the bathroom at nighttime instead of having to go outside to the outhouse. Now, the Bannings were lucky. They had staff here, servants to help them with the chores like cleaning the chamber pot. Some families did not have those luxuries, and oftentimes it was the children's chore to clean the chamber pot. This is the girls' room. It's dedicated to the two girls, Lucy and Mary. Growing up here on the Banning Ranch, when Mary and Lucy were little, they played outdoors and did many of the outdoor things that boys did. But when children became teenagers, for girls, that's when their life became more of an indoor life. And girls were expected to learn certain things, like learning to sew, learning to run a household, those types of things. Usually girls in those days did not have as much formal education as boys because there were very few jobs for women. Two jobs that I can think of are a nurse or a teacher. But most girls in those days, it was their goal when they grew up to get married. And so it was with the two Banning girls. Now, part of a girl's education in those days was learning to sew. All girls learned to sew as part of their education. Also, boys and girls also learned social skills. And by social skills, I mean things like learning about music and learning to dance and things of that nature. In those days, girls always changed clothing behind a changing or a dressing screen, and that's what this is, a beautifully decorated changing screen. So even if no one else were in the room, the girls would go behind here to change their clothing. And this changing screen is really quite beautiful. In those days, it was people often saved things and repurposed them. And in this changing screen, these beautiful pictures that were saved by someone were decoupaged onto this screen. So people would save pictures that they liked from magazines or maybe from wrapping paper or greeting cards. They would save all of these things and do a project. Something like this must have taken a long time, but it's really quite beautiful. This is actually a photograph of Lucy when she was a teenager. She was a princess in the parade called the Fiesta de las Flores. That was an early parade in Los Angeles prior to the Rose Parade. Okay, so we are in the boys' room now. This room is dedicated to the three boys, William, Joseph, and Hancock. And as we look around this room, there are all sorts of hints about what activities the Banning children and children of that time like to do in their spare time. One of the things I see over here on the bookshelf are the books, and reading was very popular. One of the most popular subjects was reading about the Wild West. Up here we have deer antlers that are used to make a hat rack. Remember, this was a remote area. There would have been deer in the area. Deer shed their antlers, but also they would have hunted in those days. On this hat rack, it starts out with a 1-point antler. So this would be from quite a young deer, maybe no more than 3 years old. And it goes over here to a 6-point antler over here. So that would have been from quite a large deer, a royal stag. In the corner, we have a desk. And of course, studies were very important. There's a book here, a little reader from school, a stereoscope again. We saw one of those downstairs. And right on top is an abacus. That would have helped them with their math problems. Over here, there is a Civil War sword up here. And remember, this house was built in 1864 during the Civil War, and there would have been Union soldiers right down the street. Another popular item in those days, are any of you into physical fitness? Well, the Bannings were, and that's what we have here. These are weights that would be filled with sand, and you could do your exercise, get your exercise with the weights. Over here, another example of repurposing. Remember I said the girls would sew, and what we have here are the wooden spools that the thread came on. Someone put them together and made a little shelf here. Okay, more clues about what the Banning children like to do in their spare time. Look at this, it's a telescope. Can you imagine? There would have been no street lights back in those days, so no light pollution. They would have been able to see the stars very clearly, the planets. That would have been a very popular thing to do. This looks like a toy boat up here. Many toys in those days were homemade. They would save scraps of wood and work on them for a good time. Does anyone like to listen to music? In those days, they listened to music on their graphophone. You put a wax cylinder on, you turn the crank, and the sound came out here. A kite. Many homemade toys in those days. Kite flying was very popular. Did you happen to notice the bicycle over here? Look at how high up that bicycle is. It would have been quite a dangerous ride, to say the least. There were no handbrakes. It would, in order to put on the brakes, it would kind of be like a tricycle. You would put one foot back to go on the brakes. And fishing poles. Fishing was very popular. Over here we have a canteen. Just think of it. Of course, here on the ranch, the children would have all learned to ride horses. And can you imagine going on your horse with a canteen? Maybe you're taking your fishing tackle and a fishing pole along. And definitely some binoculars. Those are really nice ones in the center. There's also a bag of marbles there. That was another very popular game of the time.